Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yanique Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, we have with us a very special guest, and her name is Tema Frank. Tema is a best-selling author, international speaker, teacher, and business consultant. She has over 3 decades experience in marketing strategy, usability testing, and customer experience improvement. Her recent book, People Shock: The Path to Profits When Customers Rule, was a finalist for the 2016 Best Book Awards and quickly hit Amazon bestseller status based on 4 years of research and an in-depth interviews with 150 business leaders and thinkers. It has been praised by the likes of Patrick Doyle, CEO of Domino's Pizza, and authors Shep Hyken and Jay Baer. In 2001, she launched Web Mystery Shoppers Inc., the world's first company to do omni-channel customer experience testing, using social media techniques before social media existed. She recruited a panel of 75,000 mystery shoppers worldwide. And so, in doing all of this, Tema was able to test all of the customer service channels that organizations would experience, such as live chat, telephone, social media, and in-store. So, Tema is also a fellow podcaster, and she started podcasting in 2012. So she is our podcast senior, and her podcast is called Frank Reactions Podcast on Customer Experience. Definitely a must listen. So without further delay, welcome, Tema.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, could you take a little bit of time and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your journey and why customer experience is so important to you, and what do you think is the connection between marketing and customer experience?
Well, it's interesting because I think that connection is becoming so tightly intertwined, you can't ignore it. But just to step back a bit in terms of my experience, I guess I was always kind of customer focused, and my very first career was actually in business government relations, or as we would now say, a lobbyist. And of course, that's all about understanding the public and how the public reacts to things and what's important to them. And so I think I sort of developed it from there, that this focus on understanding customers, understanding users. So it was always an interest of mine. And then my first book, which actually came out in the mid-1990s, kind of embarrassing to admit how old I am here, was about Canada's best employers for women. And what I concluded was that the best for women were great for men too, because they treated all people well. And of course, a huge element of great customer experience is great employee experience. So the recent book just kind of tied that all together. But I think customer experience is just so important because we all are customers, and to have good lives and good society, we need to treat each other with respect.
Very true. Excellent. I could not have said it better myself. So, it's one of the things that motivated me to start this podcast, because I am a customer experience trainer, and I go into organizations and help them to work with their leaders, work with all of their team members, so that they can all get an understanding that customer experience is everyone's responsibility, not just the customer-facing employees. Because for some reason, IT and accounts seems to think that because they're not directly interfacing with the customers, it's not their responsibility.
But you're quite right. It's everybody's. So
it's funny that I bought your book last year when I was doing some research for my first online program. Mm-hmm. And the book has lots of great points in there, like things that I totally buy into completely. So I want you to just speak a little bit about your 3P profit formula that you speak about in the book, and why do you think the brand is so important, And what would be some of your recommendations as it relates to a small business trying to incorporate some of the things that your book recommends into their own business? Because a lot of our listeners are small business owners. So they're not like the big conglomerates who already have a structure in place and, a culture department. They're just trying to, mold things out on their own.
Mm-hmm. Well, the exciting thing is that in some ways it's actually easier for really small businesses, because one of the key elements to creating great customer experience is a leader, a CEO who cares and who thinks this is important. So if you've got your own business, you're in a wonderful place to set that tone. Mm-hmm. But basically, the book, People Shock, when I talk about the 3 Ps of profit, the 3 Ps are promise, people, and process. And you need to get all of these right to create great ongoing customer experience. So the promise is, why are you doing what you're doing? And what about it would motivate people to care? And those people include both customers and employees. And, I give some examples in the book. Even a business as, seemingly uninspiring as a janitorial service company, you can find ways to make that inspiring. And I give an example of one of those in the book. So the promise is also really important because it sort of sets a guideline and a filter for decision making, because part of providing great customer service and customer experience involves letting go and giving your front lines more responsibility and more authority. If they've all understood and bought into this common vision, then they have a filter. It helps them make the right decisions when they have to make decisions without you there to say yes or no. So promise is the first element. People is the second element. And, we obviously focus a lot on employees, which is crucial, because you're not going to have happy customers if you don't have happy employees. But beyond that, and beyond the customers and prospects, there's a whole range of other people who will affect whether or not you can deliver consistently great customer experience. So that includes people like your suppliers and your distributors. So if you have been rude to your suppliers or don't treat them well, and there's a shortage of supply, who do you think is going to get it? It won't be you. So all those external relationships with your lenders, with all these people, can influence ultimately whether or not you can keep on delivering great customer experience through good times and bad. So that's the second P, the people. And then the third P, and this is where a lot of organizations slip up, is process. And when you're just getting started, you don't really have a lot of processes in place, and you can sort of fly by the seat of the pants and just do stuff and get it done. And that's great when you're getting started. But I would really recommend that any small business, right from the beginning, start documenting how you're doing things. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, not just related to customer experience. It will also make it easier as you grow. But you want to reevaluate your processes as you grow. So at least once a year, look back at how are we doing things, and does this still make sense? So, there's an example that I give in the book of this company, a manufacturing company, and they complained there was this one customer for whom they always had to punch a hole into a piece of metal before they could ship it to them. And it was kind of annoying, but it was a good customer, so they thought, okay, fine, we'll do it for them. Then in interviewing the customer, it turned out they were saying, well, we love working with this company, but it's really annoying because they ship us these parts with holes in them, and we have to fill the hole before we can use it. So doing some research, it turned out that the need for that hole dated back to a decade earlier when they were both using different equipment. And at that point, it was needed. But nobody had ever reassessed the process. Here they were doing something that added to the time, added to the cost, added to everybody's frustration, and it wasn't helping anything. In fact, it was hindering. Mm-hmm. So regularly reevaluate that third P. So that's basically the 3P process.
I love it. So we said promise, which is very important, keeping your promises. We speak about this all the time in our workshops, that it's so critical that you keep your promises. And I always ask the question, what is a promise? And you'll have some employee in the organization that says to me, a promise is a comfort to a fool. But The reality is you don't have to say I promise for someone to perceive it as a promise. I mean, once you've said I'll take care of it, the customer or the employee that you're talking to views it as your commitment to do what you said you're going to do.
Right. Exactly.
So it's just getting them to understand that concept and to be clear on giving realistic promises so that they can set realistic expectations of the persons that they communicate with. And then, as you said, the people are important. No people, no business. And it's not just about the external people, but it's also about how you nurture your internal people too.
Yes, absolutely.
And I totally agree with you as it relates to promise. You know, one of the things I also notice is that a lot of organizations have what's the word I'm looking for now? They have these structures in place. So let's say they had a policy that was created back in 1945 when the business just started. But then the consumer that they were serving in 1945 are completely different from the consumers they're serving in 2017.
Yep, absolutely.
And so you're right. They need to revisit the policies on an annual basis to ensure that it's relevant to who they're serving.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So totally agreed with you.
And of course, that's more important now than ever because things change so quickly. With technology changing so quickly, what made sense a year or two ago probably doesn't anymore.
Very true. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And customers drive that change so much based on their own demands and their own experiences.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
My next question to you, Tema, is what are some everyday solutions that you believe can help to change the mindset of some of these business owners so that they can put, just as how marketing is a priority, so advertising on Facebook is a priority, advertising on Instagram is a priority, but training their staff and getting them to understand how they want them to treat their customers for some reason is not a priority. How do you get them to have that mind shift to understand that they're, as you said, customer experience and marketing are so intertwined now?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think the best thing you can do if you can persuade them to do it is for them to go and work on the front lines for a while. Just spend a day or half a day, even a month, working on the front lines and find out what's really going on there. Because as you become more senior in an organization or even in a small business, if you as the CEO are focused on raising money and doing big deals, once you've got the deal, you're not thinking about what's happening to that customer. And it's really easy to lose touch. So I think the most important thing is get out there, talk to customers, existing customers, not just focused on getting new ones. And if possible, get on the front lines and find out what they're experiencing or go undercover. I mean, there's this show in the US called Undercover Boss.
Yeah.
And you know, it amazes me with that show how many of these CEOs, and they're always shocked by what they discover. And I'm thinking, well, what makes you think you need to go on TV to do this? throw on a wig, go to your store. You know, like, really, you don't need a TV show to do the undercover thing.
True.
So that's something that's very, very valuable. If you are not the CEO, though, or the owner of the business, and you're trying to convince them, so the other thing that can really help to persuade your colleagues or your boss is if you can actually bring them the voice of the customer. So whether that's through an audio recording where they actually are hearing the customer complain, something that makes it real to them. Even if you can't get an audio recording, even just transcribing, writing out the words, these are the exact words our customers are using. That will help make it real to them in a way that reports or statistics or your own telling them in your words just aren't going to have the same impact. So I really, really recommend, if you can, getting them onto the front lines or getting yourself onto the front lines. And if you can't, at least presenting the voice of the customer to those in charge.
Okay. So those are some good solutions because that's some of the obstacles that many organizations face. So the team members, they really have the passion and the desire to want to improve things, but they're not the decision makers, and they're not able to get the decision makers to understand that, we really need to make this investment because, the return is going to be phenomenal if we're able to really retain our existing customers.
Exactly. And the thing is, most employees, I would say all employees, they want to do a good job unless and until you've really, really irritated them. If you've really upset them, then fine, they might be out to get you and destroy your business. But the vast majority of employees, and all employees when they start, they want to do a good job for you and for the customer.
Yeah. That's true. So in reading your story on your website, I found it very interesting that your first experience working with a bank where you had team members that were hanging out at a bar with the boss drinking during the working day, and you guys were putting in all this work. I mean, how was that experience for you?
Depressing. And that was what led me into entrepreneurship, because I thought this is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was an interesting experience. So basically, we were part of a rebel unit that had been set up. And the guy who was leading the rebel unit, he was great at building a team, which did involve, hanging out in bars and partying. But then once he had the team in place and there was work to be done, he wanted to continue hanging out in bars and partying. And my boss came to me and said, look, you're not helping your career by staying in the office doing your job. I was working in marketing at the time. You should be at the bar with the VP. And I said, sorry, that's not what I signed up for. And then when it came time for layoffs, all the first people to be let go were those of us who were doing the work.
Wow.
And it took about 9 months before head office realized that everything had fallen apart. And then he did finally get fired. But it was really frustrating. Very, very disheartening experience. But, it did give me the
opportunity,
kick in the pants, I guess, to start my own business.
For sure. And I believe out of every negative situation, there's always something positive that can come from it. So, sharing your story, seeing how you've been able to rise above the obstacles, and you're able to really, let people know that at the end of the day, you do have some employees who genuinely want to come and do a great job. They are not into slacking off and just sitting around and not doing anything. So that's important.
And the thing is, if employees are just slacking off and not doing anything, usually it's because you've failed to motivate them with that promise.
True.
You're not treating them right. You're not inspiring them.
Very true. Very true. All important things. And I guess it goes back to also, as you mentioned, motivation. Many employees are not motivated by money, right? Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. Money is sort of necessary so you can survive. But paying somebody more won't get them to be more customer friendly.
That is true. So what are some of other solutions that entrepreneurs could use to motivate their employees? What are some success ones that you've seen over the years?
Well, I think the biggest one is involving employees in decision making. So listening to, instead of imposing decisions from above, try and get decisions to often flow from below. So the people who are closest to your customers in some ways have the best knowledge about what's going on in your organization. And a lot of employee unhappiness that I find is because they feel they're not heard. And they do in fact know better than some of their bosses, but the bosses won't listen and don't care about what they think. So basically, you want to involve people at all levels and from all departments in decision making and in strategizing about how we can make things better for the customer. I mean, you said at the beginning of this show that, often accounting and IT don't think that customers have anything to do with them. I think one way to overcome that is to get those people on departmental teams and let them start hearing the voice of the customer. My first sort of major business, I guess, Web Mystery Shoppers that you talked about in the intro. The reason I created that company was this was in the early days of e-commerce and websites. And I found that there was a marketing department, sometimes a completely separate e-commerce unit, and then the IT people. They all depended on each other, but they were set up as completely separate units and weren't even speaking the same language. And what I did with that business is I would have anywhere from 30 to 300 people from their target market who give detailed feedback about, this is what's frustrating us about your website. And when I was able to go back to all these units and show them that, it was a way to bring all these people together and realize they did have a common objective.
True. That is true. Very powerful. And, you know, one of the things that you also mentioned, or I've seen on your website, is there's a free book that you offer, 85 tips for a user-friendly website. And
yes.
Like, one of the things that I found, and I'm just going to share it with you as a podcaster, is when I'm looking for guests for my show, and I'll probably source them through maybe Amazon if they wrote a book that, you know, really inspired me and I think it would be good to hear their message. And Amazon probably has their profile with information about the author, and then it usually should have a link to their website, or some of the authors actually have their email address listed right there. What I find very frustrating as a customer myself is most websites, for some reason, have a contact us form where they control how they contact you versus giving me the opportunity for you to provide your email so I can reach out to you. Because when I send that contact us form and it says, you know, send, I'm not guaranteed that somebody's actually going to receive that in an inbox and respond to me within a reasonable time.
Yep, absolutely. And that's part of what's driving people onto social media to complain. You know, if you provided better service in quieter means, whether it's making yourself easily accessible to customers through phone or through email, and dealt with that better, then people wouldn't go and complain about you so much in public.
True. That is true. So that would lead me to my next question. What are your thoughts on social customer care? Because that's a new thing, right?
Yep. Well, and it's interesting. The podcast I released this week was on that very topic. So social customer care is something that is rising. And I think companies have caused that to happen, as I say, by underfunding their call centers. So if you have a choice of sending out a tweet and getting a response in an hour or two, or a few minutes often, versus spending half an hour on hold, of course you're going to do the tweet.
True.
And so what's happened is companies ended up training people to go onto social media to complain. So we can't really turn that clock back. That has happened. So now what smart companies are doing is they are staffing accordingly and making sure that they catch things quickly on social media and deal with them well and quickly.
And it's being dealt with publicly too, because
exactly.
Many people who do complain, they're not sending a private message to the company. They're just posting it on their wall.
Exactly. And so as a business, you want to catch that really fast. You want to be able to get back to them quickly in a non-defensive way. You know, unlike the CEO of United Airlines, you don't start by blaming the customer. You know, you start off very calmly and saying, let's talk about this. Sounds kind of complicated. Maybe we can discuss this offline, but I'd be happy to help you.
Right.
So then you're sending the message to anyone who read their public tweet. Yes, we care and we want to help, but you're also giving them incentive to move it offline.
True. That is
true. Or move it out of the public. It's still perhaps online, but out of the public.
So it's interesting that you indicated that they shouldn't get defensive. My question is, how do you interpret an organization that you've posted a complaint on their wall and people have commented on it, but they go ahead and they delete it?
That's such a stupid thing for them to do. Because the thing is, people take screenshots, right? So you can't delete history. History is real, right?
True.
So it's a very foolish thing. And in fact, it's likely to provoke further attacks, and it can blow up by doing that. Far better to deal with it. If they're complaining, far better to calmly, rationally explain your side, but non-defensively. You know, you start off by empathizing with them, but then you explain your position. Give it a couple of rounds. If they're still being unreasonable, then you say, look, I'm sorry that we can't seem to see this the same way. If you'd ever like to discuss it, here's how you can reach us, and then just let it go. And what will happen is unless you really have been unreasonable, the vast majority of readers will see that you're the reasonable one and that this person's being crazy, and they'll discount them.
Yeah, that's true.
Better to do that than to delete it and risk having it blow up in your face.
Exactly. Because as you said, you can take a screenshot which would facilitate you allowing you to post it somewhere else or on your own page.
Yeah.
And other people who've read comments or seen, feedback would be like, well, I was on here yesterday and this happened and now it's gone. Like, what's happening?
Exactly. And I suspect that a growing number of people now who do post complaints have learned to screenshot at the time.
True. That is true. So there's some evidence that something was done, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
All right, Tema, can you tell us what's the one online resource, tool, website, or app that you absolutely cannot live without in your business?
Gmail? No, but in fact, an enhancement to Gmail, there's a tool called Active Inbox. And because I spend so much of my day in Gmail, Active Inbox, what I like about it is it's sort of a task manager, but it's built right within Gmail. So as you get emails, you can turn them into tasks, you can set follow-up dates, you can put them in different categories. It's so easy. And I've tried so many different CRM systems, and anything that makes me leave Gmail and Google Calendar to go into a different program, it just doesn't happen. So I find that tool very, very useful.
Okay, Active Inbox. So our listeners can definitely check that out for those of you that use Gmail as a strong tool or resource in your business. Could you share with us some of the books that have had the biggest impact on you over the years?
Sure. Two of them come to mind. One of them is a book that was written, I think in the 1950s, maybe, by Peter Drucker, called The Effective Executive. And you have to get past the fact that he only refers to the executives as he. That was the product of the time at which he was writing.
Right.
But if you can get past that, there's so much good advice in there about how to bring out the best in your people. And one of the things that he said in there that really stuck with me was, instead of trying to fix people's weaknesses, structure their job so you can focus on their strengths.
Amazing.
That was brilliant.
Amazing.
So that was one. Another one, and to anyone who's working in the online world, this is especially important. There's this tiny little book by Strunk and White called The Elements of Style. Very small book, basically about how to write more clearly and more effectively. The main message from there that keeps sticking with me is omit needless words. So anytime you've written anything, go back and think, can I substitute a 3-syllable word with a 1-syllable word and have the same meaning? And can I get rid of some words and still convey the same meaning? And the more you can distill that way, the more powerful your message will be.
Excellent. Because people don't like to read, right? So the shorter the copy, the better.
Yeah. And the less jargon filled. I mean, that's a mistake that a lot of, especially IT businesses, they do that all the time. They're so full of jargon. Well, even people in their industry don't really enjoy reading that stuff.
Mm-hmm. True. Very true. All right. So 2 powerful books, and they're both available on Amazon, and we're going to have them listed in the show notes for this episode. Now, Tema, we have a lot of listeners who are business owners and managers who feel they have great products and services, but they lack the constantly motivated human capital. If you were sitting across the table from that person, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them to have a successful business?
Hire carefully and listen. Really, really listen to your employees. Ask them questions, get to know them. Involve them in ideas and decision making. Use their full brains. Don't just use the little portion of their brain that's devoted to handling a widget every day. You want to use the full person. And if you do that and treat them as a full person, you're going to get much better out of them. Great advice. Excellent. Now, could you share with us what's the one thing that's going on in your life right now that you're really excited about? Either something that you're working on to develop yourself or your people. Ooh, so many things. So one of the things that I'm working on right now is actually an update to my first book about best employers for women, which I think is a really important issue these days. And, when I wrote that first book in the mid-90s, I really thought this would be a non-issue by now, 25 years later. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So that is something that I am certainly really interested in. The other thing that I'm working on is just figuring out how can I make the principles and ideas from PeopleShock more accessible to people through courses, through workbooks. And so I've started working on that as well.
Very cool. Well, we will definitely keep posted on that, because as I want to resonate with our audience again, the book is truly amazing. It's written in very, very simple terms with practical examples that you can relate to. And it has the 3 Ps, which are very important for any business's success, small, medium, or large.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Yanique. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Now, Tema, can you tell our listeners, if they want to connect with you further after listening to this amazing episode, where can they find you online?
Sure. Well, the easiest is probably to send me an email, and it's Tema, T-E-M as in marketing, A, at frankreactions.com. I am also on Twitter, and that's just at Tema Frank. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. That's the one nice thing about a weird name like Tema. As long as they've got the spelling right, I'm easy to find. So T-E-M-A. And there is also a Frank Reactions Facebook page. And of course, I would encourage them, in addition to listening to your amazing podcast, to also check out the Frank Reactions podcast on customer experience.
For sure. Definitely. I would encourage you as well too, guys, that are listening to this episode. So before we wrap the episode up, Tema, one of the things that we like to ask our guests is, what is one quote or saying that during times of adversity or challenge you tend to pull on to kind of reignite your spirit and yourself and get you centered so you can push forward? Do you have one of those?
I think the one that I like best is a friend of mine who was an entrepreneur, a very successful one, but, you know, as all entrepreneurs, you've got ups and downs, right? And her husband, who's a very calm, mild-mannered guy, said to her at one of these down points, he said, "Remember, the movie isn't over." Nice. And it just keeps you going. It's like, okay, we're at a low point now, but we know there's going to be something good coming.
True.
So I like that line.
Nice. Good. Remember, the movie isn't over yet. Amazing. I like that one too. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tema, for sitting with us this morning and sharing all of this wonderful information that you've shared with us. Again, I'd like to encourage those that are listening to this podcast to head on over to iTunes and listen to Tema's podcast, Frank Reactions on Customer Experience. Am I correct?
Yes.
And she also can be connected, as she mentioned before, through Twitter or LinkedIn, and her name is spelled T-E-M-A, which will also be in the show notes of this episode. And we would like you to also encourage you also, if you really want to improve on customer experience and leadership in your business, head on over to Amazon and purchase her book. It's amazing. It's called PeopleShock, The Path to Profits When Customers Rule. And for those of you that have not come to the realization yet, customers do rule, because if you have no customer, then you have no business.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So thanks again for listening. I'm your host, Yanique Grant. We really appreciate your support of this podcast. Are you ready to grow your business even more? Or improve your leadership skills? Or train your team members in the art of customer service? Give us a call at 305-848-0815 or visit our website at www.yaniquegrant.com. That's YANIQUEGRANT.com. Remember, 305-848-0815 or visit our website at yaniquegrant.com. Our new online course, Mastering Customer Experience and Increasing Your Revenue, is now available. The link for this will be on the show notes of each episode starting September 7, 2016. The first 2 modules are free, so hop on over, have a look, and take the steps to increase your revenue.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.